welcome back to the Boropolis Podcast for Series 2. Last year, it was our first series. We've got a little bit of experience under our belts now, and we're back for a campaign full of ups and downs. Chris Wilder at the wheel. Our setup hasn't changed, but we're hoping that Middlesbrough's setup might change a little bit in the next few weeks. Of course, Nathan, you are back for a second series. You haven't been shipped out on loan. You haven't been transfer listed. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, new contract signed and sealed. Back again for another season. As you say, ups and downs as expected. It's going to be a long ride, but yeah, we're strapped in and ready to go for another season.
Yeah, we should say it was a tough negotiation with you, Nathan, and his ego wanting all kinds of money, to be honest. We haven't announced them on social media though, so maybe that needs to be worked on. But yeah, you've got good money out of the podcast, so fair play, Nathan.
Yeah, I mean the negotiations, unbelievable. Nearly as good as Jed Spence's agent.
I tell you what, if you even got a penny close to what that man got for his move to Tottenham, then give your agent a pay rise. We, of course, are all joking about this. We're still relatively amateurs, aren't we, in the podcast game, but we're back for another series. And to be honest, we've got an awful lot to get into. So let's get started. And we're going to rewind a little bit. Because, of course, we finished last season, that day at Deepdale. We're not even going to get drawn into that, but it didn't end the way we all sort of hoped it would. After the game, there was that pretty convincing, pretty interesting post-match press conference from Wilder. He said there'd be surprises. He said there'd be a few players going out the door. He said there's a few good players, that would bring in. Since that point, perhaps not as many transfers as we may have hoped, as probably Chris Wilder may have hoped, considering we're a week away now from the start of the championship season. But we should probably go through those who have actually left since we last recorded a podcast, because we didn't take this sort of break by half measure. We sort of just went absolutely cold turkey. So we've got so much to get through. So players that have left, possibly under the surprise category, I guess. Sol Bamba. Firstly, Nathan, I mean, we've just got to say what a man, but he is out the door. I mean, it was sad to see him go, but probably the right decision with a little bit of hindsight.
Yeah, probably, yeah. I think we all thought that Sol was a bit of a strange signing at first. Thought it was just one of Warnock's boys that were coming in last season to provide some sort of cover. But what a difference that man made in the dressing room as a leader and just as an ambassador of the club, really. Fantastic to have him at the club for a season. But yeah, Wilder was always going to make changes, and we've seen that, getting rid of some of the old guard that were sort of just stopgaps in the Middlesbrough side of last year.
Yeah, so I think probably into that category, a special mention to Sol because of just how much of a legend he is, really. But from that category, Neil Taylor and Lee Peltier, I think both sort of fall into the, as you say, without disrespecting them, because they were good servants, obviously, last season, at the key parts of the season, but were realistically stopgaps with their age and their contract status. Of course, they've gone as well, sort of more expected, really. I think a few probably thought they might be given another year, but Chris Wilder was ruthless, and they've both departed. Onto the sort of transfers now, which have happened throughout the summer so far. One quite obvious one, I think most people celebrated it like an incoming transfer. A certain goalkeeper with the initials JL departed on loan. He's joined Reading. Of course, I'm talking about Joe Lumley. It didn't go his way last season, and I think Chris Wilder was always going to have a real shake up in the goalkeeper situation, which we'll get onto in a little bit of time. But yeah, Joe Lumley was the first sort of senior player really that departed.
Yeah, and really, I think that the final nail in the coffin for Lumley was probably that game against Hull in April, where he, of course, made that mistake for Keane Lewis Potter's goal, just sort of dived underneath it. But yeah, we saw the highlight reels of Joe Lumley mistakes posted all over social media throughout the season, and those highlight reels just seemed to grow and grow as the season grew further on. But yeah, we did know that there was going to be changes in the goalkeeping department. Probably not as many as there has been. Zach Hemming and Solbrin both gone out on loan as well, to Kilmarnock and Swindon respectively, and a new goalkeeping coach as well, Alan Fettis, in the club now. So yeah, plenty of changes in that department. We'll get onto some incomings a bit later on.
Yeah, so of course you mentioned 2 outgoings there. I think now onto the biggest departure. It was always going to be probably the biggest, or one of the biggest talking points of the summer, of course. We get the playoff final out the way. The man in question decides to have a little bit of a pop at Neil Warnock following the end of that game, and of course celebrating with his cigar and the playoff final trophy. Of course, we're talking about Jed Spence. It really, the talking point, to be honest, once it was confirmed, was not the big fee or what we were going to spend that money on. It was how long it actually took, because it dragged and it dragged and it dragged. And for weeks, we were getting reports that there was advanced talks. We were so close in valuations. And then it eventually got done. I think really, of course, we'll get on to incomings and the situation right now with that. But I think that's probably affected us quite a lot, really, in terms of incomings, and just it got boring towards the end, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. I think pretty much from that playoff final, everyone knew that Jed Spence was going to be going to either Tottenham Hotspur or Nottingham Forest. And then it became obvious that it was going to be Tottenham Hotspur because of the lure of Champions League football and playing probably back down in London, where, of course, Jed Spence is from. But the way it's dragged on has frustrated Middlesbrough fans a lot, really. And it's probably frustrated those inside the club as well. Yeah, okay, it is money in the bank for us now. But Tottenham playing hardball over a couple of quid, that's probably nothing to them, was a bit strange. But I suppose business is business. It's done now. We can all forget about Jed Spence. I'm sure he's already forgotten about us. Just cut all ties. Who cares how he gets on?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is obviously incentives in his contract, and there's sort of 2 sides of the coin, isn't there? Whether you want him to do well and earn us a few more million, or whether after the way he acted towards the end of the season and some of his conduct on social media and things like that, a lot of Middlesbrough fans would be quite happy if he never even played for Tottenham. So yeah, there's 2 ways to look at it, isn't there? But I even considered even mentioning him, because I think, as far as Jed Spence is concerned, he never actually played for Middlesbrough. And I must say, fair play to Nottingham Forest for obviously getting that big fee for their player. Oh, sorry, no, he wasn't actually ever a Nottingham Forest player. He was always a Middlesbrough player. But we're not bitter on this podcast at all with his social media antics. We're happy to see him go. Jed, let's see how you get on at Tottenham. Neil Warnock said he could either be Premier League or National League, and in fairness to him, he's made the Premier League. So I think that's enough on him, to be honest, because, as he sort of insinuated, he was never really, he was never going to acknowledge Middlesbrough, was he?
No, he wasn't, and I suppose that's fair enough. For the way that some fans, including myself at times, have sort of felt about Jed Spence. They felt that he didn't fulfil his potential at the football club. But yeah, as long as he's acknowledged those behind the scenes that saved his career and brought him to the football club in the first place, then I suppose that's all that matters.
Yes, of course. Now on to another departure, which really I think probably falls into the surprise category. Some people may have seen it coming after one. Was when this player would really kick on this season and build on what was a slightly underwhelming first season in England. Martin Payero, a little bit of a sore subject, I know, with myself. Of course, we're going to get your opinions on it now, but another one that sort of rumbled away in the background. There was an awful lot of reports coming out of Argentina, South America, that he was going to be exiting on loan. Some were saying permanent. Of course, in the end, Martin Payero joined Boca Juniors on loan. In reports, there was sort of the nod towards an obligation to buy, or definitely a view to buy in that loan deal. So it remains to be seen. It didn't really give a huge amount of detail in his sort of in the article that the club put out about his departure. But just in terms of, how you feel about that, it seems, old news now, but we've definitely got to talk about it because it definitely split a lot of people's opinions, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one where you can see why the club have done it, but it's a failed project, isn't it? At the end of the day, it was a risk that the club took by bringing him to the club last summer. A new country for a young player, a new culture. Of course, coming from Argentina over to Middlesbrough, it's probably hit him quite hard how different it is and how different the lifestyle is over here. Injuries haven't helped him at all, really, especially as he was starting to make a few substitute appearances in and around February time, and he came off the bench at Loftus Road and tried to fly into a tackle close to the touchline, got his foot caught in the ground and done his ankle. But yeah, it's one that's very unfortunate, really. You can tell that there's a good player in there, really, with the flashes that we saw, especially looking at that Cardiff game where of course he scored and was probably man of the match that day, was sort of pulling together a bit of a relationship in midfield with Matt Crooks. Of course, this was all before Chris Wilder came to the football club. But yeah, back to Argentina for Payero. I really hope he excels and wins the league with Boca Juniors this year. And who knows, we may see him back in a Middlesbrough shirt, but for now it looks very unlikely.
Yeah, I think, like you say there was, certainly an argument that it was a bit of a failed project. It raised a lot of questions about the recruitment, and I think always because of the fact there's been a sort of, not miscommunication, but the waters were always a little bit muddied with what we actually paid. Initially, I think when it first broke, probably a year back now, it will have been worn in the summer transfer window. God knows what time during the night. I think the initial fee that was sort of quoted was 10 million euros, and I don't think it was ever that figure. I think it was actually 3 million initially up front, is what sort of is the figure that was banded around towards the time that he was heading for the exit door. A lot of certain podcasts saying that he was bought for 6 million, which was just quite frankly not true. But yeah, for me with Payero, we've talked all summer about incomings, outgoings, and my feelings on all of this. But of course, we haven't, properly dissected things on a podcast. For me, it really upset me. I can't lie. It was one of them players where, there's this sort of argument where, well, if he was called, Martin Patterson and he was from England and we bought him in from Blackpool, no one would care about him. But as you say, there was definitely signs of a real player in there. Of course, injuries, I'm realistic enough to acknowledge that injuries, of course, played the part. And, certain sub-appearances, I don't think he probably had enough time to really, stake a claim to win that starting spot that he was after. But for me, I'm not one that, I don't really buy into the narrative of sort of that he was given a fair chance and he didn't impress. In the times where he was given a fair chance, I think he really did impress. It wasn't, everyone singles out the Cardiff game, but there was also, I think around about that time, there was the Barnsley game as well. And I seem to remember another home game around about that time. Peterborough it was actually. And he was really impressive. Sort of showed what we all thought that we were getting when it was first rumoured and everyone was, getting excited about it. So a real disappointment for me. I would personally have loved to have seen him stay and be given a chance to even show what he was about with a clean bill of health in pre-season. But obviously it wasn't to be. And Martin Payero probably will not play in the Middlesbrough shirt again, which is a sad reality for me because I was rooting for Martin. But yeah, that is the reality of the situation. Of course, he has departed. Another departure, Nathan, not quite of the split nature of maybe Jed Spence or controversy of Payero. Grant Hall only recently actually has departed and joined Rotherham on loan. I don't think there was any huge arguments from any of the fan base. I think most people, in the least disrespectful way possible, actually remembered that he actually plays for the club, to be honest. He's still a contracted player, never got a sniff under Wilder, and now he's out on loan. And, best of luck, because he didn't do anything horrific in a Middlesbrough shirt. I'm not saying he was fantastic, but, best of luck, Ollie.
Yeah, Streets won't forget that bullet header against Blackpool at home earlier on in the season that he fired past Lumley. But, yeah, I think he'll do all right for Rotherham, actually, Grant Hall. That's if teams in the Championship aren't playing balls in behind him and making him run back towards his own goal. But, yeah, he'll probably do okay for Rotherham if they play a low block and if his main job's just clearing the ball and winning headers, because he's very good at that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thought of fast strikers running in behind Grant Hall is probably making him sweat as much as I am now, because it is absolutely boiling at the time of recording. So, yeah, I feel your pain, Grant, if you are sweating at the thought of some pacey, a Michael Obafemi or something like that, or someone like that, a player of that ilk running in behind that Rotherham defence. That probably is a terrifying thought. We've done outgoings quite quickly. Of course, we wanted to get into the exciting things. Of course, we wanted to get onto the incomings so far this summer. Mentioned it earlier, there's been a whole sort of rejig of the goalkeeper situation at the club. The first arrival this summer, actually, Liam Roberts, happened fairly quick, actually, from when it was reported in the press. Joins, I think everyone sort of already knew when he joined that he was going to be second choice, or at least, putting pressure on whoever that number one was going to be. At the time of his arrival, I think the Carl Darlow links were probably the heaviest of the number one shouts. Obviously, it's panned out a complete different way. But Liam Roberts, a transfer that makes sense for us, makes sense for him, a good age. Quite happy with that, Nathan?
Yeah, I am. A backup goalkeeper that was the top clean sheet earner in League Two last season for Northampton Town. But I think last season was his first season for Northampton. He's been around the block a bit, around those lower divisions, but for Walsall for the most part, but a very good season last year for Northampton, and at 27 on a free transfer coming into the football club as a backup, I don't think anyone can really complain. He's moving up to the highest level that he's played at so far in his career, and from the interviews that he gave when he first joined the football club, it looks like he can't really believe he's here, which it's nice to see that, to be fair.
Yeah, it really is. It was a massively endearing interview. I think as soon as anyone watched that, any Middlesbrough fan, you instantly sort of wanted him to succeed. It remains to be seen sort of what involvement he'll get. I'd imagine it'll be cup games, and of course, if there is an injury to our new number one, who we can talk about now. I think for me, the real standout signing so far of the summer sort of come out of nowhere, really. And when the name was in, I think it was Alex Crook from TalkSport that broke the news. There was certainly from my point of view, I don't know about you, Nathan, but I was thinking, is he put Middlesbrough in the wrong tweet there? Is that a mistake? But no, Zach Steffen, Manchester City's number 2 previously, joins on a season-long loan, USA international, a real sign of intent from the club. I was, massively impressed with this signing. We've only seen him, slightly in the recent friendly against Marseille, but you can already tell his qualities. You can already tell the experience that he's gained from training with Man City. And okay, everyone's going to bring up that error in the FA Cup, but if you look at it from a real sort of basic point of view, you don't get to be in Manchester City's number 2 under Pep Guardiola and be a bad goalkeeper. And Chris Wilder's already put pressure on him, saying he thinks he can be the best goalkeeper in the division. And I think he's got to set the sights himself as that. Nathan, I mean, were you as impressed as what I was with this signing?
Yeah, I was. When the link first came up from Alex Crook, I kind of just, my immediate thought was that mistake against Liverpool in the FA Cup semi-final. But yeah, upon looking a bit deeper and watching some, of course, like your YouTube videos that everyone watches that makes every player look like the best player in the world, I thought Steffen looks like a really good goalkeeper. As you said, no one ends up at Man City these days that hasn't proved the worth. And Zach Steffen earned himself a 4-year deal just last year at Man City, which just proves how highly they rate him as a goalkeeper. And yeah, we saw his quality in that friendly against Marseille. Distribution is something that Chris Wilder wants in his goalkeepers. We said it last year that he wants his goalkeepers to be confident with the ball at the feet and just to be able to play out from the back comfortably, not feel any pressure really from centre forwards. And from Friday's friendly against Marseille, I think it was clear to see that Zach Steffen holds all the attributes that Chris Wilder wants in a goalkeeper, as well as the ability to just save shots that we didn't seemingly have last year.
Yeah. That always does help in a goalkeeper, doesn't it? The ability to actually stop any form of shots. No dig intended. Yeah, on Steffen, just a little bit more so. Just, I think the expectations, probably because of that Chris Wilder interview at the end of last season where he said, there's some really good players that want to join this football club. I think we spoke about it actually in the last podcast of last season, saying, it's one of the most convincing and reassuring interviews probably ever from a Middlesbrough manager, at least that I can remember in my time supporting. And it got me excited. But, up until really the Jed Spence transfer went through, I think there was a little, it's difficult to say even now. We're going to do our predictions later, and it is really difficult because I think we're still a long way off the way that we're going to look come the end of the transfer window. But for me, Stefan really was the first signing where I thought, yeah, okay, the aspirations this season aren't just, settling for a try and nip into the playoffs. I think Chris Wilder probably might not admit it to the press, but I think he'll be aiming a lot higher. And if we can get the bodies that some of the players we've been linked with, some of the players that Chris Wilder's spoken about who he's excited by, who, of course, it remains to be seen whether we will do that. We might not, and it could change the whole way that the season pans out. But yeah, that signing definitely got me excited. Another, again, good addition, Darragh Lenihan from Blackburn. Probably not a name or a position really where people thought, we really need a centre-back, especially someone of his quality. But the link popped up and, immediately people were saying, well, we're taking one of Blackburn's best players here for no transfer fee as well. It's certainly not bad business, is it?
It's not at all. It's not at all. Darragh Lenihan, of course, last year played in that back three for Blackburn and looked like one of the best centre-halves in the division, really. Can play in the right of the back three or in the middle, as we saw in the friendly on Friday, playing in that centre. And yeah, we've got a really good player there, someone that can lead by example, someone that has captained sides before in the past, and someone that's coming into the peak, really. I think last season was the first sort of year where Darragh Lenihan was becoming noticed by Premier League sides. Not yet, maybe next season. by Championship pundits, really, as one of the best centre halves in the division. And yeah, it's a really, really good addition. Replacing, of course, Sol Bamba, Lee Peltier, that fill in them roles at centre half for us last year. We've now got four centre halves to fill three spots. Anthony Dijksdale, Dale Fry, Darragh Lenihan, and Paddy McNair. And you look at them four options there and you think, wow, they're some of the best options that you can possibly have to fit a back three in the Championship. And I think a lot of the debate now is really coming from fans saying who will be the ones that start. Of course, Lenihan's coming in and he's been offered a 4-year deal as well. Yeah. So he's in it for the long haul. He's clearly part of the club's long-term plans. And it's certainly going to be interesting when all of those four are going to be fully fit, what Chris Wilder opts with.
Yeah, it's, again, it was, as I say, it was, I may be wrong here, but certainly when I looked at the squad at the back end of last season, centre-back, okay, we probably needed bodies in because of the departures, but, I don't think I would have expected a player of the sort of ability, as you say, rated as one of the best centre-backs in the division last season, and, you say Premier League there, I think a few Blackburn supporters probably thought, if he is going to run his contract down, he might make that step up, for the likes of Bournemouth or a team like that, join a lower end Premier League team and try and force his way into a team at that level. But to go and get Lenihan, who, of course, I think it was widely known really that Chris Wilder's chased him for years and years and years, especially during his Sheffield United days, to eventually get him at the club of course at Middlesbrough was a massive coup in Chris Wilder's eyes. And that was the first signing where I think even you can't judge signings off social media, but certainly it looked like a few people sort of sat up and took notice a little bit and thought, well, they've already got three centre-backs who you'd regard as, three of the, if you ranked all the division centre-backs, Middlesbrough's three would already be probably quite near the top of that list. but to add another one is, it's impressive. You certainly can't knock it. On to the next edition, though. And this one was a strange transfer, really, because it was reported that there was interest there. There was no sort of reports or articles that come out to say that there was advanced negotiations going on, or, he was undergoing his medical. And then one day, after a little bit of a cult hero among the Twitter fan base, most Middlesbrough fans were aware of that certain account now, popped up on a random afternoon, got announced. That was done. Of course, we're talking about Ryan Giles. For me, and I think most Middlesbrough fans, we talked about it countless times last season on the podcast. We become so over-reliant on the right-hand side and Isaiah Jones. It was a necessity that we needed the same threat from the left-hand side. And we've gone and got that, haven't we, with Ryan Giles?
Yeah, I don't think that you could have picked a better player to get in to play left wing back to have that same impact that Jones has on the other side, really. Giles last season, he struggled in the back half of the season with Blackburn in his second loan of the season. But in that first half with Cardiff, in a Mick McCarthy side that was incredibly poor, Giles got 10 assists in half a season with, he had a proper centre forward in the box to hit in Kiefer Moore. But it just goes to show that if there's a man in the middle there for him, Giles will pick him out. We saw last week in the pre-season friendly against Morecambe in a half. It's pre-season friendly, but it doesn't really matter. In a half of football, Giles picks up 3 assists from that left-hand side. And when you look at Middlesbrough's play last season and sort of the passages of play that we usually have of passing it down to that right-hand side and then coming back into Dijksteel and knocking it into House and then switching it back out wide to McNair and then the left wing back. Every time it went to the left, it always seemed to just break down or be knocked back, and we try and work it to Jones every single time if we were going to try and create a chance. But now we have that option to go down the other side, and that is exactly what we needed. We just need someone in the box now, and that's where the club will be targeting next 100%.
Yeah, so we've covered incomings there. For you, out of that list, who's the real standout? Because I know I went quite heavy on the sort of Stefan. It's Zach Stefan. I see a lot of people spelling it Stefan, and you've made me pronounce it wrong for all those people. You're at fault for that. But yes, of course, Zach Stefan. I was really impressed with that signing. You may agree, you may disagree. What was the real signing that stood out for you?
I think Stefan has to be the one, really, at this moment in time, just because of the goalkeeping situation of last year. It was the talking point pretty much every week, with mistakes being made. Not even if a goal wasn't conceded, there'd nearly be a clanger every week. And it got to the point where it was a toss of a coin, really, of which goalkeeper you'd pick out of Luke Daniels and Joe Lumley. And I remember about January last year, we were panicking ourselves on this podcast about giving Solbren a go. So now to have Stefan there as the main number one and the best goalkeeper in League Two as his backup, I think we've completely sorted that area out. And of course, a new goalkeeping coach in there as well will no doubt help improve the way Chris Wilder wants to have his goalkeepers really being confident with knocking the ball out to those centre halves and also knocking it long in behind for the fullbacks. Like Stefan tried the other day to knock a ball down into that left channel, cleared I can't remember the right back. It might have been Klaus actually in that second half for Marseille, cleared over Jonathan Klaus's head and Giles was through. So you can see the distribution that Stefan's got. So for that reason, really, the goalkeeping situation last year and the immediate signs that we've seen in that pre-season friendly from Friday, it has to be Zach Steffen for the signing of the summer so far. And I'll say so far.
So far, the two key words. On to the really juicy stuff now, of course. If you follow us on Twitter, we try and keep you up to date with the best, fastest Middlesbrough coverage. Okay, sometimes we may not do that, but, Twitter's our sort of main way of getting out all of the links, and there's been plenty of links so far this summer. Of course, I think if we try to cover all of the names that have been linked, we'd probably be sat here until after the West Brom game's done. So we'll cover some of the ones that have sort of been more, heavily linked or got to that advanced stage. Some of the rumours so far have, of course, been, bids going in for players, loan offers. But one free agent who's currently, at the club, he just hasn't signed yet. He's been spent the majority of pre-season training with the club. Tommy Smith, of course, left Stoke City at the back end of last season. Well known for captaining the Huddersfield team that got promoted. Being, a real solid player in the second tier of English football for years now. If you've watched the Championship for long enough, Tommy Smith. And I think everyone's in, complete agreement that on a free, it makes complete sense to get that deal wrapped up and get his contract sorted as soon as possible.
100%. I mean, you look at just the squad at this moment in time and you look at those wing-back positions. Of course, on that left side now, we've got Giles, Bowler, and even Hayden Coulson still sat there in this squad. And then you look towards that right-hand side and there's Isaiah Jones and no other option really to fill that void should Jones get injured. So Tommy Smith is that perfect backup man, really. And we've had this thing before, of course, last season with players signing as right backs and playing everywhere across the back five. And we saw Tommy Smith play as a left-sided centre-half for the last 20 minutes or so of that friendly against Marseille on Friday. And it's just given me a younger Lee Peltier vibe, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, I can tell. You've been on to me every day, messaging as though I can, give you the information on second-by-second updates on, what may happen with Tommy Smith. You are massively for this signing, aren't you? He hasn't even officially signed and become a Middlesbrough player, but you already love Tommy Smith.
I'm a big fan. I am a big fan. I think just looking at the sign from the outset, he's 30 now. He's got championship experience. He's evidently a leader with captaining Huddersfield. He can do a job as a right back in a 4 if you want him there. But from everything that we've heard from Stoke fans who've watched him for the last few years, they've said he's much more comfortable going forward. So that perfectly fits that right wing back role for Middlesbrough. And yeah, it seems like an absolute no-brainer for me. If Tommy Smith would like to come and be a part of this squad and have a crack of getting in the Premier League, I'm all for it.
Yeah, well, of course, we did see reports just yesterday, I believe. It may have been the day before. Of course, we're recording this on Sunday night. Derby County are trying to, jump ahead of the queue and nick him from our grasp. It remains to be seen what's going to happen. I know Wild has said after the Marseille game that there'd be talks over, the next 2 days. Hopefully, that can be put to bed, and by the time this podcast's out, it can be all wrapped up and announced, because it just makes sense, doesn't it? Just touching on Derby County again and nicking players from our grasp, certainly there was a bit of a debate whether it was actually as close as what was, perhaps reported in the press. David McGoldrick's name cropped up with experience playing for Chris Wilder. Of course, he did join Derby, and Derby fans took great pleasure in, thinking that they'd nicked him from Middlesbrough's grasp. I'm not 100% sure that was actually the case, but not really too disappointed to see that one go elsewhere.
No, I don't think I am either. At the time, I possibly was, because of the links to the forwards that were coming up at that time. I'd have taken McGoldrick as a backup, as that sort of experienced forward that can nurture the other ones in there. You look at Josh Coburn, if he was to stay at the club and not go out on loan. But yeah, I think at 34 now, David McGoldrick has slightly gone past his sell-by date, especially with a season-ending injury later on towards the end of last season, that kept him out for about 2 months, I think it was. So yeah, it's probably not worth the risk. We'll just have to wait and see. The wait for forwards goes on.
Yeah, one forward that, of course, was, really been, I'd say actually the striker that we've been linked with most all season, Dwight Gale. That was, a lot of people whispers and the odd Twitter rumour here and there, which, of course, you can't always believe. He's joined Stoke. I don't actually know the details, whether that ended up being a free transfer, but from an awful lot of people and sources, I think we've all heard of some of the astronomical wage demands of Dwight Gale. I mean, for a player that hasn't played football for 2 years, and as we've said, on very, very big wages, again, as a sort of, option up front, I don't think I'd have been devastated if we'd signed him, but also I don't feel devastated that we haven't signed him, to be honest.
It's a strange one, because I will be devastated that we haven't signed him if we don't sign players of his calibre as replacements for him. Of course, yeah, he hasn't played football for a few years now, sort of being second fiddle at Newcastle, hasn't really got many minutes at all. So, yeah, that is a point to be made. But as a forward in the Championship, I don't think that you can get much better in his prime than Dwight Gale. I mean, for the type of forward that we want, someone that presses, someone that gets in behind, someone that makes runs, just someone that can finish 1 and 2 chances that they get in a game, it seems ideal. But for the wage demands, as you say, that were rumoured for Gale, it's probably a no-go, especially considering he's now 31. There was talk of the club being a bit more keen to bring in younger players, younger than 30 at least. And if that's the recruitment model, then I completely agree with it. I think that's fair enough. We want to be signing assets to the football club that can be sold on in future, not players that you sign for big wages, possibly big fees that are going to have no sell-on value in a year or two's time. So I can see why that deal wasn't done, but he'll be sure to score against us when we play them fourth game of the season. So
yeah, well, we've got to get it in early because, you know, if you listen to this podcast last season, if you're a new listener, you'll realise there's certain players, and I think most people are aware of the types that they are. You know, the Martin Waghorns of the world, the real veterans of the Championship. That you just know, even if it's their only goal of the season, which actually, ironically, I'm pretty sure that was Martin Waghorn's only goal of the season last year that he scored against Middlesbrough. They do a job against us. Andy Carroll at the age he is should not be striking fear into us, but the way we are, he does. And I'm not sure he's even signed for anyone yet, so there's that to worry about.
I think he's coming to Boro.
I
Get him
mean,
at Boro.
I'm really no. Well, if the transfer policy is older than 30, he certainly doesn't fit that category, and he certainly doesn't fit Chris Wilder's gorgeous, fast-flowing football we see and will see more of this season. But yeah, Dwight Gale, of course, that one didn't happen. But yeah, as Nathan says, if you are a betting man or woman, then get your money on him. In that first game of not first game of the season, but first game against Stoke this season, because he is bound to score. I think that's a guarantee, really, to be honest. Another player, just before we sort of move on to more targets that haven't happened yet and might still happen. We were heavily linked with Ryan Nyambe from Blackburn. Of course, you know, there's a little bit of criticism of the source that this come from. And, you know, you can take it with a pinch of salt if that's your viewpoint. I think just in terms of, you know, of course, this is a separate thing, the podcast, but, you know, when we are reporting on transfers, there's always a reason. I think, in fairness to Football League World, they did call Matt Crooks first last season. So although they may get one and maybe 50 shouts, right, they did get one. So, you know, it's one of them where if it does happen and we didn't sort of report on it or tweet about it, then it would, you know, a few people might sort of say, well, what's going on? But yeah, I mean, whether it was going to happen or not, it seemed to just come out of nowhere and then disappear out of nowhere. He's joined Wigan. To be honest, again, as soon as the link come out, I wasn't really sure why we would be going for him, because Blackburn fans were adamant that he is a right back and not a wing back at all. Possibly could have filled in at the right centre back position, but I don't think that's a position we really need to strengthen in. So I think, you know, fair play to Ryan Nyambe. He's got himself an okay Championship move, but again, I wasn't really shedding any tears over him going elsewhere.
No, neither was I. If anything, it just sort of makes the point that we are signing Tommy Smith, and that really gets me going.
Yeah, it does. I think you've made that very, very clear now. In terms of strikers, the most exciting thing of the summer, because it seems like now the main priorities that Chris Wilder has spoken about is that left-sided centre-back role. Of course, we were linked with Ben Davies. He's joined Rangers. And, you know, midfield depth, cover for Johnny House, and that's another position that I think will probably end up being a loan deal towards the back end of the window. But the real priority now, and it's so glaringly obvious, judging by all the pre-season friendlies, we are in desperate need of signing strikers. Everyone, and I mean every single Middlesbrough fan, was convinced by the time Jed Spence would be sold, we would have announced Victor Gyökeres the day after. It hasn't turned out that way. I think that price tag, judging by some of the reports and a few whispers here and there, it may turn out to be a little bit too much. But since then, a name that's cropped up an awful lot and got people excited, Adam Armstrong, of course, had a big money move to Southampton from Blackburn. He is almost guaranteed goals in this division without, putting a potential kiss of death on that transfer if it does go through. I think, given Wilder's comments about having offers on the table for a Premier League or 3 Premier League strikers that are waiting to replace the players going out of their doors, it's sort of been accepted that Adam Armstrong is one of those 3 names. Nathan, I know for a fact, because like Tommy Smith, you've pretty much messaged me every minute of every day saying what's happening with Adam Armstrong. There's been nothing sort of concrete that he's, close to joining, but that's one name that doesn't seem to be going away. I know this one really gets you excited.
For a fan of a championship club to see your club linked to a forward that scored 28 goals in the same division 2 seasons ago, I think if that didn't bring a smile to your face, get you excited, do all of the above, then I wonder what's wrong with people, because that is some signing if Adam Armstrong makes a move to Middlesbrough. Can score all types of goals, really. Can shoot from outside the box, can come up with a moment of magic where he just fires one from the halfway line like he did at Cardiff a few years ago. Takes penalties, takes free kicks. Yeah, he's the exact type of forward that Chris Wilder wants. That short forward that is very similar to Aaron Connolly in build. But yeah, has that pace about him to get him behind and will just finish chances. I think he is the perfect centre forward for this Middlesbrough side. And now that we've had a conversation about it for 5 minutes, it's probably never going to happen. But
yeah,
it'd be unbelievable. And I mean, unbelievable if it did happen.
Yeah, he's certainly a striker that is getting people excited. Another name that cropped up, and if I was to compare it to something, it was like, going about your business, your daily routine, not expecting anything, and then checking your phone and seeing an ex-girlfriend like one of your Instagram photos and thinking, must have been a mistake. Rodrigo Muniz is back on the scene, and he is up to his usual Twitter antics again. He's dropping eye emojis like they're going out of fashion. He's even liking fans' tweets about the kits, about him potentially joining the club. The Brazilian that kept me up at all hours of the night last summer trying to translate tweets from Veni, I believe he's called. I'm sure you'll all know the Brazilian journalist that I'm on about. He ended up joining Fulham, but he's back on the scene, and it seems as though he's another Premier League forward that, if he is replaced by his current club, will join the club. Nathan, it might be a year later than anticipated, but I know a little bit of Brazilian magic is also getting you really excited.
I really want a Samba striker, and this man may give me just that. I mean, when I tell you that I was sat there in my front room on a Wednesday evening last summer watching Rodrigo Muniz dodgy highlights off some Brazilian YouTube channel at like 1 o'clock in the morning after seeing a link on Boropolis, then it's just deja vu, really. Of course, he's had that first season in England now. Although it probably didn't go quite as to plan as he probably would have hoped because of the antics of one Alexander Mitrovic, who decided that he was going to go on a madness last year and score like 43 goals in 43 games. Yeah, it probably didn't go quite as to plan. And Fulham going up to the Premier League, they're looking to sign players that are going to keep them there this time. And they're opting to allow Rodrigo to go out on loan. And of course, Middlesbrough front of the queue after last summer. That bidding war last summer, I think we always sort of felt like we would be beaten because of the pull that Fulham have got in terms of London and the nightlife down there. And of course, just the finances, really. Yeah. But yeah, a loan move for a Brazilian. They tell you never fall in love with loan players. Well, we've already signed two that are really, really decent loan players, and moves for Premier League forwards that possibly score more than 5 goals a season. That's the stuff of dreams for a Middlesbrough fan, a forward that scores more than 5.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, just quickly on going back on something you've just said, the pull of London nightlife. I mean, clearly Neil Bowser and Leo, when they flew out last summer, didn't mention flares or Barcuda or maybe it's even a night in Empire. You know, I think if that had been put on the table, then he would have only had one choice. But clearly Neil Bowser just forgot to mention that, because I don't think he would have had a decision to make if that was the case.
Probably not after a lovely 2-1 Derby away win in February. A pint in the pig iron will probably do our Rodrigo. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one where we're just sort of refreshing every device that we currently own to see whether we're going to get an update on that. You know, I never thought I'd see the day, but I'm currently searching through Twitter looking for links with Southampton and Fulham strikers to see if that could get the ball rolling with those two players. Just quickly, we mentioned players that we missed out on, and you mentioned a certain Aaron Connolly, which right now may have earned himself a new chant in the Venice area, which I'm sure those that you may be watching or listening can probably work out, thanks to his antics on Snapchat towards the back end of his loan spell last season, that of course we aren't going to go into on this. Thomas Henry sort of just cropped up out of nowhere, reportedly put a bid in of 6.7 million. I can't remember if it was definitely euros or pounds. I'm probably going to lean towards euros, but that didn't come off. You know, it may have been the case. There may have been interest there, but you know, that I think that move again, he was always prioritising staying in Italy, and he has done so. That's one to cross off the list. But you know, just on players that we missed out on that were linked. Another name and another Premier League forward who quite recently has been sort of the main name that has been rumoured, and probably out of the names mentioned that seems the closest, judging by reports. Marcus Forss of Brentford had a loan spell at Hull last season, which didn't really go to plan. But for a long time now, Brentford fans have sort of rated Marcus Forss as a forward that, you know, he might not bring a lot in terms of, you know, his passing range or his pace. But one thing they all agree on is that he knows where the net is. And I know his goal record doesn't, you know, scream out guaranteed goal scorer, but that seems to be the consensus among Brentford fans, that is his strength, his finishing ability. So I don't think he'd be coming in as the main man. But in terms of that link, Nathan, is that someone that you'd be happy to see come in?
Yeah, I would be. If he's a forward coming off the bench, quite similarly to the way he was utilised as Brentford went up 2 seasons ago, where Ivan Toney was the main man and Force was coming off the bench with 20 minutes to go when the game was a bit tighter, and he'd probably get one chance and score. It was something. It's something that I remember.
I seem to remember him scoring in the playoff semi-final for Brentford. I may be wrong there, but
yeah, he did. He did. He scored the winner in the playoff semi-final second leg when Brentford beat Bournemouth 3-2, I think it was, in that game. So, yeah, he scores goals off the bench. Of course, as you say, last year, going on loan to Hull, it didn't quite work out. And many fans that don't know a lot about Force will probably look at his stats and his Wikipedia and see, oh, well, he made 11 appearances for Hull and scored once. Well, yeah, but it was in a side that was struggling down the bottom of the league, fighting for their lives, and he certainly wasn't the main man there at the time. So, yeah, he'd be a good option, I feel. But that's as long as he's not the main forward coming in. I think that we need to prioritise signing forwards that are going to be the main men that are going to come into this side. But I have a feeling that we're not going to get those first choice forwards until, who knows now, until the end of the window maybe, which sets us back, unfortunately, sets us back six or 7 games into the season already. And of course, this weekend, going into the season, we've got Duncan Watmore, Josh Coburn, Cal Cav as the forwards, with Riley McGree being used as a makeshift number 10. So we'll have to wait and see on the striker front, but hopefully it goes sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think with the striker front, obviously, shameless plug, make sure you are following Boropolis. I'm sure if you are listening or watching to this, you probably come off Twitter. So, yeah, get the notifications on, and we'll try and keep you up to date as best as we possibly can with the search for these strikers. In terms, there's an awful lot of exciting things going on, but there is always a risk that you can have your heart broken. And one transfer that really sort of picked up towards the back end of last week in terms of reports and speculation was Marcus Tavernier, bids of 10 million from Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth, reportedly. I think with Nottingham Forest signing of Lewis O'Brien, that probably takes them out of the race for Tavernier now. But Alex Crook, the man that reported the Stefan transfer, seems to be suggesting that Tavernier would quite like the move. And Bournemouth are in advanced talks now. I think when that come out on Friday afternoon, everyone thought, well, he certainly won't be involved in the Marseille friendly. He was, of course. He scored in that game, played well by all accounts, and looked quite happy. Perhaps it isn't as advanced as what has been reported, but certainly there seems to be concrete interest there. Nathan, I'll ask your thoughts on this first, but this one really worries me.
Yeah, it's one that will be very disappointing if it does go through. From a fan's perspective, of course, if this was this time last year, I'd have probably laughed and said, yeah, whatever, because I didn't really have that sort of feeling towards Marcus Tavernier at all. But as we said in the last podcast to this, at the end of last season, we talked about our player of the seasons, and I named Marcus Tavernier as mine for his massive improvements throughout last season. It'll be really upsetting to see him go to the Premier League. Of course, the Premier League is where every professional wants to be. But with Bournemouth being the side that are concrete in their interest for Tavernier, it makes me think Is it really a move to the Premier League? Yeah, for a season, because I have no doubt in my mind that Bournemouth are going to be straight back down, probably finish rock bottom of the Premier League this season, just because of the transfer business that they haven't done at all so far. And with 2 weeks to go for the Premier League season to start, it's going to be very difficult for them. And they've got Aston Villa and Man City in the first 2 games. So they're 0 out of 6 straight away. So we'll just have to wait and see with Bournemouth. Of course, they're a club that are in a better moment than Middlesbrough at this moment in time, just being promoted to the Premier League, have been in the Premier League for a significant amount of time over the last sort of 10 years, I'll say. Of course, spent the last 2 in the Championship, but bounced straight back up, were backed heavily by their owner in January to push themselves over the line. But yeah, it'll be disappointing to see Tavernier go. 2 years left on his Middlesbrough deal, so we can command a fee that we see suitable. And yeah, he is an asset to this football club. At this moment in time, we just have to deal with Middlesbrough being a club that is going to be a selling club, and I don't really mind that at all. Jed Spence came through the academy somewhat, sold for a sizable fee. Marcus Tavernier came through the academy, will look to be sold on for a sizable fee once again. We should be commanding fees for these players. Tavernier, Fry, if someone comes in, Jones, if someone comes in. Those players that have come through our academy that are key parts of this side. The thing that I would like to see us start getting right is when we sign players that are young, sign players that are hungry, sign players that show signs of improvement, so that we can then sell them on for a profit. We shouldn't just be signing players. I'm just going to name a few names here. Players like Uche, players like Chuba Akpom, that you sign for minimal fees, but you're not going to sell on for a profit because they're not going to improve on what they already are. So we should be taking a few more risks, although some don't pay off, like Martin Payero hasn't paid off, but you have to take those risks. Just for example, Burnley just go and sign Scott Twine. Scott Twine's a player on his way up. He proved it in League Two 2 years ago, where he was fantastic for Swindon Town, signed for MK Dons and won League One Player of the Year, and proves he's miles above the level of League One. And now at 22, 23-year-old, signs for Burnley for £3-4 million and will no doubt prove himself in the Championship and sign for a Premier League club in 2 years or 1. So I'd have liked to have seen us sign players like Scott Twine. But yeah, going back to the Tavernier thing, yeah, it will be disappointing if he does go.
Yeah, I think, the signs so far from Chris Wilder have been that, and I was a little bit shocked by it, rightly or wrongly. That might just be my, that might have just been my viewpoint on the situation. That I feel at the moment the best thing for Marcus, dear me, getting upset, having voice cracks. Marcus Tavernier, not Mar. That was a really bad one, but we'll move on and pretend it didn't happen, Nathan. Marcus Tavernier, at this current moment, I believe, is in the best situation, the best place he can possibly be to develop once again. And okay, yes, if he stays for one more season, and no doubt in my mind that he'd have another good season and probably improve on his value. Now, okay, the contract situation makes that a little bit difficult because it would then go to 1 year left, and it would probably be, a fee that we wouldn't be best pleased with if he left in a year's time and, we didn't get promoted. But I just feel that right now letting go of Marcus Tavernier. And I know a lot of people have said if it was, towards the 15 million mark that we couldn't turn it down. I just think for what we would potentially replace him with, what he offers to Chris Wilder's system, what he offers in terms of, I think, towards the back end of last season, even in pre-season, it's pre-season, we're seeing an improvement in terms of his attacking output. I just think it wouldn't make any sense at all. And yes, it's a little bit of a risk. People will say, well, we could reshape the complete look of the squad with a fee that's being reported. But for me, I'd be happy to take that gamble and say, well, we're having a right good go at it this season. We want Marcus Tavernier to be a real part of that. And yes, it might come out. I'm not saying that this is the case, but it may come out that Marcus Tavernier wants to go and he doesn't want to be part of it, and that could happen towards the back end of the transfer window. I don't think it will, but if that's the case, then it changes the look of that situation completely. But at the moment, whilst he seems relatively happy, played with a smile on his face, looked delighted when he scored the other night, I'd keep him at the club. To play devil's advocate, is there a fee that if it reached that stage that you would say, yeah, you've kind of got to step back and say, let him go?
It's strange at this moment in time because we've seen various reports, haven't we, about what fee Middlesbrough would look to command. A few sources said 15, but then TalkSport the other day in that Alex Crook report saying that Bournemouth were in advanced talks with Marcus Tavernier and Middlesbrough, it said that they'd offered 9 million plus add-ons. 9 million should be nowhere near. It has to be double figures. It has to be double figures, and I'd say it has to be closer to 15 million, minimum 12 and add-ons based on his performance. But if Bournemouth do pick up Marcus Tavernier, they've got a player there that is improving year on year at this moment in time and has age on his side. So they're paying for potential as well as a player that they're going to get. So he's no doubt an asset to whoever signs him, or if he stays at Middlesbrough Football Club, he is still a massive asset.
Yeah, I think for me, I know I was playing devil's advocate. There's not really a fee. Okay, yeah, you can say 20 or 30 million and then you'd let him go, but realistically, it's never going to get to that stage. So it's a little bit daft to even sort of have that conversation. But 50 million for me, even still, I'd stand firm if I was Middlesbrough and say, well, no, we want to keep hold of him. Chris Wilder, as we've said, okay, we haven't made all the signings that we will and that Chris Wilder wants in, but so far we've shown that we'll be ambitious, and we will. And, putting confidence in the recruitment team and Chris Wilder, I don't think there's a scenario where, okay, we might not get our first targets and we might not get them in at the times we want. But I don't think there's a scenario where we go without and end up, finishing the transfer window with Duncan Watmore and Josh Coburn as a front two that's going to have to, make use of until January. I just don't think that's the case. And I think we'll strengthen throughout the team. So it remains to be seen what will happen with that situation. But yeah, I think we're both massive fans of Marcus Tavernier. And shameless plug again, if you want to watch a great interview with him, if I say so myself, towards the back end of last season, the School of Boro, which is now a project that is done, my university final project. But if you want to see me speaking to Marcus Tavernier, then head over and watch that. Sorry, Nathan, for the shameless plug, but it had to be done. So moving on from transfers now, really. Pre-season, we sort of just went into the juicy stuff, the drama of transfers and things like that, and sort of ignored pre-season. Before we preview the real important game, of course, the opener against West Brom next week. We'll quickly go over pre-season. Started off with a convincing 5-0 victory over Bishop Auckland, a local game that happened last year. Always good to play a local team, and that first one of pre-season, just to get fans back and seeing the players. There wasn't any huge talking points, but a win's a win. We then went and played York away, which I know you attended. Another win. Again, breeding that winning mentality. And Chris Wilder, although he's talked about, the importance of fitness, I think one thing's for sure, that he is one of those managers that, pre-season's not just about running people into the ground. It's about, getting things right, trying things out, but breeding that winning mentality, winning football matches, getting into good habits. And that's why we saw him a little bit disappointed in his post-match conference or interview, if you want to call it that, against Braga. The only defeat of pre-season, 3-0 defeat there. A lot of Middlesbrough fans, credit to them, travelled out to Portugal. Of course, couldn't get that result that we were after, but okay, it's still, it is still pre-season, so I don't think many Middlesbrough fans would have been too disappointed. I think they would have been more happy with probably the few days that they had out in the sun, which I was very jealous of, I must say. We then beat Morecambe. I think that really, the talking point from that game was Ryan Giles' left foot just being an absolute wand that needs to be insured for a lot of money, because it's a wonderful left peg. And Marseille, another win, capping off pre-season at the Riverside on Friday in front of a home crowd. The talking point before that was Marcus Tavernier and his inclusion in the team. But also one aspect of the squad that we haven't spoken about, a little bit of a shock considering it was a name that most people thought we'd never hear again. Chuba Akpom, from out of nowhere, back in the squad, back on the bench, gets a little bit of game time. Nathan, the hashtag #TubeBack has been started. How are you feeling about this?
It's, again, just lost for words, really. I think that the reasoning behind him being brought back into this squad is Chris Wilder hadn't actually seen what Chuba Akpom was about. Of course, he's seen the likes of Uche in training up until January. And yeah, Chuba didn't do too badly, actually, on Friday against Marseille. Probably should have had 2 assists, one for McGree and one for Giles. But yeah, I don't think there's any harm at this current stage with Chuba being reintroduced to the side because of the complete lack of centre forwards that we've got. But yeah, I didn't quite envisage in May, when Chris Wilder gave that interview in the tunnel at Deepdale, when he said there'd be big changes in the summer, that we'd be heading into the first game of the season against West Brom with 3 forwards, Watmore and Coburn and Chuba Akpom as our options. But here we are.
Yeah, here we are. And the all-important question, I should really credit, which we did on Twitter because it was sent to us, a little graphic design of Chuba Akpom Chuba Akpom's face on the front of a train, Chris Wilder as the driver of said train. The big question really of the full podcast is, could you see yourself hopping on the Chuba train?
The 20-goal choo-choo train.
Yeah.
As much as I'd love for it to happen,
Yeah.
I don't even think that in my dreams I could see it happening. I really don't.
Yeah, do you know what? At this current moment, of course, I think, to be honest, one thing I would say was, out of those two forwards, Uche Piezu and Chuba Akpom, if you looked at the two of them at the back end of last season and thought, well, one of them might get a sniff in pre-season, it was always going to be Akpom, because I think the type of player that Uche is, regardless of how you feel, does not fit a Chris Wilder team. And I know that's hard for you to accept, Nathan. He's nowhere near. And that's no disrespect to Uche. We've said he's a good servant, but it was just never going to happen. Chuba Akpom, on the other hand, slightly more agile. And he's come back in, had a few training sessions, come off the bench, and in fairness, I thought he was okay. If it got to the start of the season, and hypothetically, Nathan, we brought in Rodrigo Nunes and Adam Armstrong, of course, we still would have Duncan Watmore, and depending on what happens with Josh Coburn, if we don't get that third striker, which, the club are quite, publicly after, and Chuba Akpom still hasn't found a club, would that be the worst thing in the world?
I think if he's there and those other four are there, Chuba Akpom's option number 5.
And I think it would be difficult to argue, to be honest, whether you're on the Chuba train or not. I think Chris Wilder probably views it the same. And I don't know why you're laughing, because Chuba Akpom, since the revelation that he was signed based off YouTube videos, has been an undoubted success in a Middlesbrough shirt. But do you know what? In all seriousness, I doubt, and I might be wrong, that we're going to recruit. Of course, there's a bigger substitutes bench this season as well. I don't think we're going to recruit 2 forwards this week, and I think there'll probably be a place on the bench for the first game of the season with Chuba Akpom's name written on it. So, if he comes on in the West Brom game, it's all hypothetical. He might be gone in a week. But I think he should be given a chance. And I'm going to be bold and say that I think he deserves minutes against West Brom, depending on how the game's going.
Have we got to be 3-0 up, or
it could be a disaster? We could be 2 down and you throw Chuba on to chase the game. We could be 4-0 up and it could be a party atmosphere and Chuba just comes on and starts showboating. Who knows? But yeah, let's get back to a little bit more serious of a standpoint, because it's very unlikely that we'll be 4 up with Chuba Akpom showboating against West Brom.
I don't know.
You never know. But we'll go to that game now. I think we've spoken enough about the Chuba train and whether you are on it or not. It remains to be seen whether you might get a last gas ticket off the conductor, aka Chris Wilder, and jump on. But West Brom, we've all been waiting for it. First game of the season, 5:30 on Sky. It's finally back. The Championship, in some people's opinion, the best league in the world. And it absolutely reeks of potentially having a Sunday ruined by Middlesbrough Football Club. No, Nathan, West Brom have made some, in fairness, quite impressive signings, all on free transfers. Jed Wallace, who, again, any Championship fan knows his ability. They've got a fully fit Darragh Lenihan that is probably going to be up top for them. They've brought in Yakuzlu, who was on loan there in the Premier League and has, got some real plaudits in that defensive midfield role. He's back at the club now. A good acquisition as well. John Swift, who Chris Wilder was full of praise for last season. He's another addition. I dread to think of the wages that West Brom are paying, but the good additions nonetheless, and they'll cause problems on Saturday night. Looking at the game, it's always difficult at the start of the season. But what are your thoughts on the opener, 5:30 on Saturday night? How are you feeling about it?
I really don't know how I'm feeling about it, if I'm honest, because we played really well on Friday, and I hope that that's not giving me false hope. But I feel it may be. When you look at West Brom's squad, it's still one of the best in the division, like it was last year, and they've improved upon it. But then I look at it and I think they've got Steve Bruce as manager, and I don't know what to think. I don't think West Brom fans are really all on side with Steve Bruce as manager, which I don't think if he was manager of any club, I don't think everyone would all be on side with Steve Bruce as manager. But with the side that they've got, it's a very, very good side. And I think if we had some forwards in that we've been linked with, I wouldn't really be feeling this way, but I'm going to go with... I'll go with my head and my heart. 1-1 for my heart, but my head says 2-1 West Brom.
A nice positive way to get back into the podcast with a positive prediction, Nathan. I think, in fairness to you, though, I think most people probably feel the same way due to the striker situation. We've definitely shown promise in pre-season, but of course it is still pre-season. We've made good additions, one of which will definitely be playing, Darragh Lenihan, because of course Paddy McNair is suspended for the game. I think he would have been injured for it in any case, but of course he misses through suspension, so it might not be such a bad thing actually, that he's picked up an injury at that stage, so that he could potentially be back for the following game. Dale Fry, I know he missed the Marseille game, but Chris Wilder said that had it have been a competitive fixture, he would have played. That was just complete, precaution, which is understandable. And I think, to be honest, whether it's just that early season optimism, whether it's the thought of Ryan Giles and Isaiah Jones flying down each flank, I think we will win. And we certainly didn't make predictions like this on the podcast towards the back end of last season, because it proved us wrong every single time. But because it's the first podcast of the series, of the second series of this podcast, I should say, and because it's the first podcast of the season, and it might be the only prediction that I do all season, and I can see the concern in your face, Nathan. I think we win this 2-0.
I mean, I thought that was going to go much worse. I thought you were going to say something like 4. So
no, that would be utterly ridiculous. I'm not that much on cloud cuckoo land, but who knows? We probably won't. I think now that we seem to have been recording for so long, but there was that much to talk about. I don't know how long we've been recording for. It could be 2 hours. It could be even longer, to be honest. But we are back. We may have been a little bit rusty, making a few mistakes here and there. You might be listening thinking, yeah, these two are back and they are spouting utter rubbish. You might not. You might be happy to hear us or see us again. Who knows? Do let us know. I think we should say, I know it is the season sort of preview of the first game, but I think we both sort of agreed that we're a little bit hesitant to make any sweeping sort of predictions for the season because of the transfer situation at the moment. When the transfer window ends, we'll probably do a recap of the transfer window. And you could say, well, you know, you can make a prediction at this stage, but I don't think it would give any sort of true reflection. I think I'd be guessing, because I think the squad will have a completely different outlook by the end of the transfer window. And I think you would agree with me on that, Nathan. So we'll save our sort of more bold predictions for a later episode. But Nathan, it's been good to be back. Have you got any final messages for the first returning episode of Series 2 of this podcast?
Hopefully the Riverside's full next week. I won't be there. I've got that first contract in again. Same as last year. Got the contract in from the Boropolis Podcast, and I'm jetting off on me jollies for the first weekend of the season. So I'll be doing next week's podcast from my hotel room in Spain. So hopefully there'll be Sky Sports in some daft bar somewhere in Mallorca, so I can watch Boro steamroll Steve Bruce's West Bromwich Albion and send Boro right to the top of the championship table for the first weekend, because that's where we'll be for the full season. Reading 106, here we come.
I was about to stop you there, but you know what? It's the first podcast of the season, so I'll allow you to get a little bit carried away with enthusiasm. However, if that was even 2 weeks in or 3 weeks in, I would have immediately told you to stop talking. So just be aware of that for future reference, Nathan. I think that's us done, Nathan, for this episode. We've been recording long enough now. We hope you've enjoyed it. We should say, obviously, you know, we've shamelessly plugged, but we're back on YouTube, we're back on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, and we'll try and keep you up to date with the latest goings on of potential transfers and all of that exciting stuff. But from me and Nathan, it's been very good to be back. But that has been the first episode of the second series of the Boropolis Podcast. Thank you ever so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.